o'clock. We could wait for another minute, maybe, because people are still coming in. What a great turnout, by the way. I appreciate it so much that you preferred our panel over the presidential one. That goes on my CV. Let's assume they preferred this one. Thank you so much for that. Welcome. Here's the game plan. You just had breakfast, you had coffee, you're still trying to digest, you have a long day coming up, new impressions, new people, many conferences. You already know what we're going to talk about, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And you couldn't care less about what I have to say in the next 15 minutes as the moderator, because that's how I feel when I'm in the audience. That's why I'm skipping the monologue part, right? Instead of that, I want to do something else with you. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to start with an audience poll. Would that be okay? It's a democracy. Yeah? That's okay. Great. It's not going to be anything like a team building exercise. I hate post-it notes and markers and stuff. It's just like voting old school. I'm going to ask you two questions. Participation is obviously not mandatory, but much appreciated. The guests, the speakers are most welcome to join as well if they like. The first question is very simple yet difficult. What is so great about democracy? You can just yell it in. What comes to your mind? Please. Freedom. What else? What do you like so much about democracy? Why are we Democrats? Plurality. What else? Change of government. Peaceful change of government. Sometimes they don't want to leave, but it's okay. What else? Accountability. Diversity, yes. The diversity of voices and voting. I'm not sure about it. Are there any linguists in the room? I'm pretty sure vote and voice are etymologically the same word. I'm fascinated by that. I'm not sure about it. Let's assume they are. Let's proceed to the second question. I want you to make a decision at this point. We are going to take a vote now, okay? I'm going to read it out loud because it's an annoying question. I'm going to read it out loud, and let's see what happens. Imagine there's some sort of vote about anything, and someone, a voter, says openly they are against democracy. They do not like democracy. They hate democracy. If you personally had the power, would you exclude or include this person from the vote? Okay, you have 30 seconds. You're not ready for this. You were just going to sit here and listen to it. But it's a forum. It's not a lecture. So I'm going to read it out loud again. You have 1 minute. Imagine there is some sort of vote, and someone says openly they dislike democracy. You personally are given the power to include or exclude the voice of this person from the vote. Do you exclude or include him? 1 minute is too long. Who would include them? Nice. Who would exclude them? Okay. Why? Do you mind? If you want to elaborate, you don't have to. Okay. Okay. We are going to talk about political education over the course of this panel. I'm looking forward to that. Almost everybody said include, right? Who would like to elaborate on that, on their decision? Yes, but in today's world, as a journalist, I observe that almost all of us, the Democrats, perceive that person as a threat to democracy, don't we? Okay, but they vote. So they are not allowed. They shouldn't be allowed to vote. They want to vote. They want to vote, but they say, I hate democracy and I hate all the Democrats. I hate everything. Why am I even here? But they want to vote. let's say we are all here today to find out. Thank you. So that would be their last vote. They want to vote so that they don't have to vote again. Okay. An election to finish all the elections. Okay. Interesting input. Thank you for that. Is there anyone else who want to say their opinion about this? No, thank you. No, that's not a hand. Thank you for being a part of this. I appreciate you participating. After this unorthodox beginning, I would like to introduce my very distinguished speakers. First of all, it's my pleasure to welcome Ms. Katarzyna Pisarska, who is the chair of Warsaw Security Forum. Welcome, Witamy. It's extra difficult to host two guests who are actually hosting me in this country. Someone who I already had the pleasure of hosting last year, Ms. Renata Salecl, a philosopher, sociologist, and senior researcher at the Institute of Criminology in Ljubljana. Welcome. Another welcome to Mr. Matjaž Gruden, who is the Director for Democracy at the Council of Europe. Thanks for joining us. I'm delighted to welcome someone from my country, Dr. Johann, from the Europäische Akademie Berlin, which doesn't need much of a translation, but let's do it, the European Academy of Berlin. Welcome. And last but not least, it's a very special honor of mine to be joined by Albie Sachs, anti-apartheid activist and former South African Constitutional Court Justice. Welcome, sir. You don't like to be called sir, but I have to. I want to sit down first, and I want to go back to our poll and pose a provocative, and as a Democrat myself, a self-critical question to every single one of you, directed to every single one of you. Is democracy worth saving if it means sacrificing those who disagree with us? Ms. Salecl, as the philosopher in the room, I would like to give the first word to you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I would say that democracy has always been an open project. You know, there has always been, in some way, a debate, a disagreement, what exactly democracy is, how should it function, which institutions are essential for it. Like, you know, similarly, other universals on which democracy relies, for example, human rights. From the start, the idea was that we can always rethink the human rights, invent new ones, and we have been inventing new ones. We only in the 80s established the right to protect children, for example, which is, we can say, quite recent nonetheless. And, you know, now we are thinking about the air, the nature in new ways. And so I would say that it is worth saving, but it will be an enormous battle, especially because it very much relies on emotions. So people might kind of agree with the general idea of democracy, but they're always torn in regard to who should be included or not. And in today's times, populist leaders are very skilled in steering the emotions, especially over the question, you know, who should be excluded, for example, the migrants, or LGBT, or, you know, whatever. And that's why I think that in today's times, the fight for democracy will be even more difficult, because people who are for human rights, equality, in the democracy in general, cannot so easily appeal to the emotions of sort of anger, jealousy, envy, a kind of hatred, even love for one nation, than, you know, the populists who are more leaning towards authoritarian ideas can.
Thank you so much for that input. Ms. Pisarska, you're not only the head of one of Europe's most important conferences, but also a civic activist. In your view, where do the limits of democracy lie?
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. And, you know, I come from a country that has had the huge privilege of becoming a democratic, stable country only in the last 3 decades. So I still remember a country that was unfree. I still remember a country that was occupied. I remember a country that did not have a choice, either in its foreign policy or in its internal policy. So when you ask me what are the limits, I don't see limits for democracy for a very simple reason, Because when I discuss, and the majority of my life I actually worked, including with the Council of Europe, on running schools, the European Academy of Diplomacy, the Visegrad School of Political Studies. These are all programs that promote democracy among young activists, young journalists, young civil society leaders, educators, and so on. When I ask them, what is the alternative? The alternative to democracy is autocracy. And when you ask people, so are you willing to live in an autocracy? No, of course I'm not. No, I don't want that. I don't want to move to Iran. I don't want to live in Russia. I'm not interested in the Chinese model of full control. I just want my country to be better off. I just want my system to be more accountable. And most important, I would like to see my politicians to show agency. And now this is a completely different discussion. It's no longer a discussion about whether democracy is the right system or autocracy or other systems. It's more about how we can improve democracies. And it is my very strong conviction that democracy is very hard to replace because, number one, it advocates, basic principles to which we all adhere. You said freedom. I think, my generation, your generation, they understand what it means to be unfree, yes? And that is something really tangible. Once you've been unfree, you never want to be there again, yes? You prefer to work for democracy. So these principles, democracy adheres to. But also democracy, and that's number two, has an ability to learn and change. And we have seen free waves of democratization of the world, one in the 19th century, two of them in the 20th century. Each time, the democratic waves then, of course, saw backlashes to the democratization of the world. So I am convinced personally that what we're seeing today is a backlash to yet another wave of democratization, the one we saw in the late 1980s and 90s. But I am absolutely convinced, and I'm happy to discuss this later on, that we will bounce back. But it's going to be a different type of democracy and a different world.
Your point is very well taken. Thank you for that optimism. We are going to talk about optimism or pessimism in the end, but before that, Mr. Gruden, as one of the leading figures in terms of democratic participation in Europe, please enlighten us about what you think about this issue.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have to apologize first because I'm a little bit lost. First of all, because I stupidly left my hearing aids in my room. And secondly, because I'm not really sure what we are talking about. I think we need to sort of try to clarify and frame the discussion. Democracy, it's a very vast notion. It covers a lot of things and it's interpreted in very different ways, especially today. It will be very difficult to find a politician today that would agree or accept that he or she is not a Democrat. So I think we have to be a little bit more precise when you're talking, is it worth saving? Is it, so, it's not only elections. You won't have democracy without elections, but having elections is not enough. They have elections in Iran. Not free, not fair, but more competitive than in many other countries that we consider democratic. So that's not enough. And I think for me and for the organization I represent, because set up to protect and nurture that kind of democracy is a democracy that in addition to elections also provides effective constitutional legal protection of human rights, political freedoms, minority rights, social security for its citizens, and protect that against any abuse of the executive power. I think that, first of all, it's something that used to be called liberal democracy. For some reason, we stopped calling it that, and I think that makes that confusion even more widespread. The last point, just want to say about worth saving. I think we should ask ourselves, are we ready to live in a situation that would follow if democracy is not saved? And I think on that, I'd say they had an issue with the way how this debate was entitled and framed. I know it was done to be provocative. Is democracy dead or just dying? But if it was provocative for the purposes of this discussion, it is fine. But on the other hand, I think it's quite representative of the sort of defeatism and pessimism that is permeating our political circus among Democrats. We're talking about democracy as if it was dead already. You know, and we went through those stages of grief in a very odd fashion. We had a long period of denial where we were unable or unwilling to see any problems and threats, and then we went from denial straight into acceptance, where we are now. And denial was problematic because it was preventing us from seeing problems when there was still time to respond to them and find solutions. And of course, acceptance is problematic because we're acting as if the fight is already over.
Thank you for that input. What you said reminded me of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, for instance. The people, not people, but these autocratic states used to call themselves democratic. They felt the need. But this is my follow-up question to you, actually, to all of you. Isn't that era over? I feel like autocrats don't feel the need anymore to legitimize themselves as democrats. They just say, this is our way of life. This is the regime we prefer. This is in our culture. So I'm not a pessimist myself. I just think that we have to be self-critical. Do you think that these states are going to need to legitimize themselves as democratic states or democrats in the future as well?
Just want to, I mean, I think that it's the fact that some of them may not, or they declare themselves liberal Democrats, or they've said that even are not Democrats, it's really not changing much. They would then talk about the will of the people. They would talk about freedom, which is another notion which is very, very broadly interpreted very differently. So they will always find a sort of way to try to legitimize their rule, whether it would be through that they represent some form of democracy. Another way, the results would be very similar.
Thank you very much for that answer. Mr. Johann, as a German historian, you probably have quite a lot of examples for the decline of democracy in your head. Please tell us what you think.
Well, I would join Mr. Gruden, and he said many of the things I would have said, but just better than I could do. I was born in a country that was called Democratic Republic of Germany, which wasn't democratic, so I could join in naming countries that declare themselves democratic. And this only shows that there is no copyright on the term of democracy. So when we talk about democracy, very often we talk about the rule of law, respect for institutions, respect for our political opponents. This is the stuff that really brings and forms cohesion within a society. Because yes, as a German historian, but you could point out many countries in the history of mankind, we have seen the demise of a democracy, of a republic, which came very slowly, but then very fastly. And this is something we are all afraid of, and I think this is part of why we are so afraid of the situation we're living in, because we think, is this comparable to the Weimar Republic, for example? And is this something where we're in the middle of a situation in 1932, or is it already the beginning of 1933, for example? And the moment we think this, we tend to forget that we have been, at least in the western part of Germany, been living for 80 years now in a very stable democracy that has been carried by institutions that have been respected by all politicians. This is changing now, but we shouldn't forget to be optimists, careful optimists maybe, but we shouldn't forget that we have 70% of the people in Germany not being aligned, or in any way of 75% this morning, who would never vote for the AfD, for example, talking about a political party that is against democratic pillars like respect for institutions and the rule of law.
We are going to revisit the AfD thing, no worries about that.
I'm happy about that.
But before that, Mr. Sachs, Albie, your life's work is a unique inspiration to everybody who defends democracy on a daily basis. First of all, thank you for that. We are all very excited to hear your thoughts about the fine line between democracy and inclusion.
I'm going to reframe your question.
Please do.
Basic question, are there limits to democracy? I want to turn that around. Is there a framework within which democracy must function for the protection of democracy? And that's been our experience in South Africa. And I was thinking about this very open-ended discussion, and the tag word of the invitation was the runaway world. And I thought, no, running is discipline, it's organization, it's focus, it's imagination. I hated the idea of running being associated with chaos and oppression and relaxation of norms and standards. And I went back to, I'm running, I'm in solitary confinement, and I'm allowed out for 20 minutes a day, and I would run. And running for me was focusing on, one day I'll be free, one day I'll be free, one day South Africa will be free. So it's that running, that gyroscope of belief and of hope in humanity, in human dignity, which comes before even freedom and equality. That was central to us. And lo and behold, a few years later, 20 million people are voting in South Africa. Other countries got independence with a new flag, a new anthem, dignities applauding. We got our independence through democracy. South Africa was an independent country, and 20 million people took part. I didn't hear the word participation in the tags that constitute democracy. And it was living the democracy even before we had the constitution for democracy. When I took the oath, so it wasn't just your country, it's like personal for our generation. I'm very secular, but I wanted to raise my right arm to remember Ruth First, who was assassinated with a bomb. I escaped my bomb. Lux Matsel-Wandley tortured to death. Bibliology thrown out of a window. The Albie assassinated, the people who died. It was more than just an idea. It was more than just a good thing. It was life for a nation. It was dignity for people. But we had to build in very important structures to maintain and protect democracy. And we even in our constitution have a chapter 9, institutions for the protection of democracy. And they include independent electoral commission. That's vital for, it's not a limit of democracy, it's the framework for democracy. A judicial service commission for choosing the judges. Extensive powers for the judges to uphold the value system that's at the heart of our whole constitutional order, a value system, not just votes, not just people accountable to the voting, but they're accountable to the values that we've agreed on, the post-apartheid kind of world, and many, many more come in there. And so this framework for democracy is something that we should be discussing. The elements to maintain it, it's more than just elaborating and improving. And the very first case, and I'll end with this, was capital punishment. It was the worst case to choose for a new constitutional court. The majority of people feel capital punishment solves problems and deals with crime. But we had to introduce the notion of fundamental rights. And fundamental rights is contra-majoritarian, but it's based on a sense of humanity that every human being counts. And we had to start with that idea of fundamental rights. We had to start with the idea that Parliament couldn't do everything it wanted simply because it had the support of the majority of the people. That Parliament could govern, but Parliament couldn't oppress. And it's the Constitution that lays down those limits. So for us, in our circumstances, constitutionalism gave us a country, and constitutionalism has kept democracy alive. And the last thing of my last thing is, we were so delighted when the anti-democrats came into the Parliament. We wanted them there. We saw that as a victory to get them to be part and part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I want to ask you a follow-up question because you mainly talked about agreement, constitutionalism, that people agreed on one thing and came together to disagree maybe. But as not only as a journalist, but as a citizen, as a European citizen, I increasingly observe that increasingly more people get annoyed by the term democracy. And I'm hearing all over the place this newly coined term, democracy fatigue. What do you think about that? Looking back to your experience. remembering your experience, when you look back to the globe, look on the globe today, what do you think about that?
Well, what is a great sadness in South Africa, the 20 million people, there was one elderly black man brought to vote in a wheelbarrow. He wanted to vote before he died. Now young people don't see any point in voting. It's not changing their lives. It's not giving them jobs. It's a great sadness for us. And we have to find ways, not through saying you owe it to the old generation to carry on. But I think democracy, and maybe that's the second round of questions, might be more participatory, more real, more live, less concerned with simply empowering certain individuals and more concerned with enabling people to have control of their own lives in their own communities.
Thank you so much.
May I just
Please.
add one thing? I don't see, well, especially in a majority of Western countries, democracy fatigue. Actually, what we're seeing in Poland, in the US, are elections where you're mobilizing more people than we've ever mobilized. If you look how much people go to vote, we just had in 2023 the largest elections. I think 72% of people went to vote on parliamentary elections 2 years ago. Young,
83
old,
in Germany.
83 in Germany. So I don't see the democracy fatigue. People actually feel that their vote started to count. But it is in a way, not for all for good reasons, because they feel that the polarization is so close that every election, as Anne Applebaum wrote, feels like the last election. Yeah, and this is also not sustainable. If we have a situation, if every time we go voting, we say, okay, this might be the last election, and if the opponent wins, it's over. Yeah, democracy is over. We're hearing this a lot, yeah? And that's also not true. I think the polarization that has been strengthened by this, media hysteria, this disinformation space, the space that we live in, is also making democracy, in a way toxic. I'm not saying that democracy itself is toxic, but the voting process becomes, a very difficult thing. But again, it is not fatigue. People want to go to vote. They see reasons to vote. But the one thing we need today is to start rebuilding some kind of consensus in our society, to depolarize our societies, because liberal democracy cannot exist if we don't have a common ground of understanding what are the ground rules, what are rule of law, what is rule of law, what are individual liberties, if we don't have that trust for institutions. And I think this is, the largest challenge, not the turnout, not the fatigue, but depolarization and making sure that people find a common ground that will allow democracy to survive in our countries.
Thank you so much, Renata.
Yeah, I very much like your idea of the last elections, because I feel that we have in many kind of countries also this belief about sort of the end of the world. Sometimes, kind of religious evangelicals, especially in the United States, that the second coming of Christ. But even in the secular circles, you have this idea of a need for a reset. We have to start anew. Everything has been going wrong, and this might be like the last election, or maybe actually everything should go to hell. That's kind of quite often a defeatism among people who are spreading fake news, conspiracy theories, in which many times they don't believe, but they are spreading them, because they are getting likes, they are getting emotions from the other side who are responding, so they are getting recognition. And a lot of this, research in America and Denmark showed that about a quarter of people who passionately spread fake news and conspiracy theories have this idea of the end of the world, that it is sort of everything is coming to the end, and it is better that a small group starts again. So this renewal, I also see sometimes behind people voting for authoritarian or authoritarian leaning leaders. Like I was in Argentina before the last elections. A lot of young people said, we don't really believe in what Milei is saying. He appears quite a strange character, and with all his dogs and, strange behaviors and policy. But we have lived 20 years under crisis. Peronists went from one crisis to another, were fairly corrupt, and now it's better that someone comes who will just shake everything up. And whatever happens, happens. So after election, I visited Argentina again. I asked these young people, so what do you think? And they still said, you know what, 50-50. He's terrible, but things are not too bad. Inflation is lower, and we will see. We will see. Maybe this shake-up opens up a possibility of a new. So I would say the last election and the idea of a renewal, starting again, are this kind of fantasy in times of where we live when actually we have a lot of crisis.
Yeah, I said before, we shouldn't be overly pessimistic and defeatist, so in that respect, I would appreciate Katarzyna's positive interpretation of the fact that we don't have a fatigue because so many people go to vote. On the other hand, I'm a very, very worried optimist. And I think that just the fact that they go to vote should not be simply interpreted as their overwhelming support for democracy. Again, I think it's important to make that distinction between different forms of democracy, because more and more people are going to vote because they want to suppress that model of democracy, because they want to give support to the parties that are going to suppress that model of democracy that we talked about, with all the constitutional and legal guarantees for rights and freedoms and the rule of law. That's the first thing. I think it is perhaps sometimes it is important to also make a distinction between democracy as a set of values and the politics of democracy, the administration of democracy. Because I think what we see very often is that people are disappointed and frustrated by the way they see democracy functioning, by the way the politicians and institutions are administrating that democracy. And of course, if you don't make that distinction, their frustration will sooner or later express itself as the disappointment with democracy as a set of values. So I think that point is important to make, and we see that when you have the researches about the attitudes of young people across Europe, which is worrying because there's accelerating tendency of embracing more authoritarian models. But when you dig deeper, it's not really disappointment with democracy. It is disappointment with the way they see democracy. And they have many reasons to be disappointed or frustrated. The last point I want to say, I think it's helpful when we discuss, I very much appreciated, when you talked about the importance of constitution institutions, and I subscribe to that completely, because you cannot have a functioning democracy without institutions, first of all, a constitution. But again, it is not only the institutions. I think there are at least two other dimensions and preconditions for democracy to function. The first is the fact that functioning liberal democracy requires that people have confidence in future, to put it in most simple terms. It means that they have reasonable expectations that their life is going to improve, that their children are going to live better than they are, and all that is measured and reflected in very simple terms. It is social and economic conditions, mostly, not only. Access to education, employment, housing, healthcare, all those things. When they lose that confidence, when that confidence and relative degree of certainty is replaced by uncertainty, that uncertainty will quickly change into fear, and then fear can quickly deteriorate into many other dark emotions that can be then very skillfully manipulated, which is what we are seeing across the world. And the last thing that I think is also very important, that is that in addition to democratic institutions, we need a democratic environment, because democratic institutions do not function in a vacuum. They require an environment in which citizens, young people, not just young people, have the opportunities, motivation, skills, competencies to engage in that democracy and make it work. And that's another thing that we have been neglecting for a very long time. And we are catching up. It's not too late, as I said, because we should not be defeatistic, but I think we should do much better. That, of course, we're talking about civic education in all different forms and contexts. We're talking about history. Education, I think, is incredibly important, not as a critical understanding of history, especially Europe, not in only Europe, is essential for understanding the importance of democracy, because it will give you an answer that you had to the question you had in the beginning, and that is democracy worth saving? Because it tells you what happens when there is no more democracy.
Amen to that. Thank you so much. I want to open the Q&A session at this moment because we have not so much time. I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions if you have any. Please.
Thank you very much for the fascinating panel. Straight up, I come from the States, but I live in Vienna. What on earth, if you had one or two things that you could do right now in the States to somehow stop this, this train that is crashing into the other train, not theoretical, concrete, what are one or two things that you would like to have done? Or to have...
Who would like to answer that, please?
Yes, I also didn't hear very well.
Solving the problem in the United States, solving the problems of polarization and hatred.
On an activist level right now,
Well, coming from a civic society, citizenship education NGO, I think the way, very much like this gentleman said, the way to bring people together has to be enforced way more. We have to create spaces and rooms like this one, for example, where people can gather and talk about the most basic questions. Like in Germany, for example, just from a German standpoint, just to pose the question, should the AfD be forbidden? In a room like this with 50 people from Germany, because everybody has an opinion about that, and it's very rarely that we talk openly about it or even admit that we don't know what the right solution could be, and maybe can help each other out with more information about either history or the legal framework, for example. And I think this is something that is lacking in the United States completely, that you don't have any bipartisan or open rooms anymore, and that everything has moved so much to the fringes and to the extremes that you don't accept your opponent to be a legal even entity within the democratic framework, where you say, lock her up, for example. This is just one of the many, many examples where people say this person doesn't belong into politics but into jail. And this is one of the 4 points where you could say this is a democracy fading when you don't have any respect anymore for people from the other side of the aisle. So from an activist standpoint, and you have done this in the United States, this all civic education, citizenship education comes very much from the United States, and you brought this, for example, to Germany very much. So create rooms where you bring together 50 people in community centers, have them talk about 1 or 2 questions, and then let them go home. And don't make this too theoretical, too academic. Just let them talk in peace and take care that they don't kill each other.
Nervous laughter, please.
Just a practical example how this can look like. I mean, I think we have quite many, but Katarzyna and I, we were just discussing and remembering old friends. We worked together. One of the projects we worked on is the Schools of Political Studies, which is a joint venture between Council of Europe, civil society organizations in different countries. One of them is in Istanbul. We created the Istanbul School of Political Studies in partnership with Bogazici University and Osman Kavala's foundation. And it's been in existence ever since, even though Osman Kavala has been now in prison in, 6-7 years already. The director of the school and our very dear friend Hakan Altay has just been released from prison a year ago because he was one of the those who were condemned in prison after the protest in Istanbul. And I went to Istanbul to attend one of the seminars. He started organizing seminars of this school of political studies immediately after coming out of prison. And I came to Istanbul and I found a room in which there were people from, in today's Turkey, you would not imagine sitting in the same room. He brought together the officials from the ruling party, from the Erdogan party, the opposition parties. He brought the LGBT activists. He brought the grave wolf nationalists, extreme right. And all these people were sitting in a room. And at the moment when I entered, they discussed the pros and cons of gender quotas in elections. I mean, it is possible. Of course, it is easier when I do it on a smaller scale in small rooms, but you just have to multiply the rooms and spaces.
I'm just going to act as if I'm not Turkish because I don't comment on that. Please.
Yeah, and I can absolutely align with what Matjaž is saying, being for almost 10 years the director at the Visegrad School of Political Studies, you know, bringing people from different walks of life and different backgrounds and trying to, in small scale, make that difference is critical. And coming back to the United States, you know, in 1997 to 1998, I was an exchange student in the US in a place called Shreveport, Louisiana. For those of you who do not know, this is the town of Speaker Johnson. It is the end of the world in a way, because it's not really Louisiana, it's not really Texas, it's not really Arkansas, but it was an extremely poor space and place in the 1990s. I came from Poland, which just regained independence. It was a poor country, but Freeport felt really poor. The potholes, the lack of, the lack of, public spaces where you could spend time, the constant problem of my poor family at the end of the day. There were evangelicals, they still are, of Medicare, the inability to ensure. My host father was a tax collector, my mother was a manager in Dairy Queen. They have been high school dropouts. They were trying to make a better life for their kids. And I visited them last summer, and they really have been able to make, a better life for their kids who finished college, who are doing, one is a nurse, one is a teacher. But Freeport has not changed. 30 years later, it's exactly the same place as it was 30 years ago. And when now a lot of America discovers how the American South looks like, I asked them, where were you for the last 30 years? This has been, so many places in the United States have been underinvested. So many places were simply not interesting for the majority of the coastal elites. So if you want to do something useful as a civil activist today, is go there. Speak to the people, do community projects, show that you are not this Yankee that they hate when they ride their Confederate cars. There's such a deep division, and it's really scary to see this in a country like the United States, that people really see themselves as potential adversaries, almost enemies, If California is the end of the world for these people, if their kids go to California, God is going to forever forbid, them for saving, their souls. There's something wrong with it, There's a lack of language, and of course social media, TV, and so on is not helping. It's doing exactly the opposite. It's closing everyone in bubbles in which all their fears come out, and they come in a way of hatred, of rejection, and so on. So the only way forward, and I know it's so exhausting because, how many meetings of the schools can we have? How many people can we include? 100, 1,000, 10,000, but that's never enough. But I feel if there's more individuals understanding, we have to reach out to the other side. We have to speak to these people. We have to be that connection for them, that credibility from the other side. I think that's the only way forward.
Do you have enough inspiration to make America normal again? Not yet. Go to some other panels. Oh, good. You're on the good side. I'm sorry about that. I promised that gentleman over there then.
Thank you. Hello, Stefan Cibian from Făgăraș Research Institute in Romania. In my community, I think those who at the moment benefit most from freedom of speech are the foreign bots and trolls. Exactly. What I think this tells me is that there are two major challenges for democracy as we know it today. One is technology and the other external interest in our democratic processes. So my question is, in order for us not to see the demise of democracy, how should democratic institutions and processes be reconceived so that they can actually function on their initial values, in a sense, in this technology context and in the middle of a hybrid war? Thank you.
Who is the question directed at?
The panel.
Because they're looking at me.
I have some ideas, but I don't want to be the one speaking too much.
Please, if nobody else wants to. Or please, you go.
I mean, I think clearly the digital and AI transformation of our society is unprecedented and quick and unpredictable, and all this is true. On the other hand, I think we sometimes it also let us think there's a lot of hype about it, and we sort of somehow think that we are losing agency to act and manage that transformation in accordance with our values. And that is not only organic, that is also stimulated kind of attitudes towards that. Somehow we're going to be, we are powerless because of that development of technology, and you had that dystopian images of how we're going to be hiding in cellars while the robots will be marching in the streets. There's some truth in that, Manolo. But I think that, first of all, what we need to know, this is not an interaction between us and technology. It is interaction between humans through and with technology. And the answer is a mixture of any policy to any development is you need regulation. You absolutely need regulation. And that's why that question about whether Europe is going to persist and succeed in preserving its approach to regulating digital and AI platforms in accordance with its set of values, priorities, public policies, and interests. It's crucially important. And second, regulation on its own are not going to be enough. You also need to invest massively in people's skills and competencies, digital competencies, but also in competencies that are necessary in order to manage that transformation in accordance with democratic values.
So Johann has some ideas about it, and then...
Yeah, I want maybe to enlarge on this. We see that, let's take the example of the AfD, our right-wing party in Germany, where you can see that the argument is, oh, this is very much of this is Russia-controlled, and Russian bots are influencing and brainwashing people in Eastern Germany especially, but also in the West, into voting for the AfD. And by this, you are generating another, put down of these people because you take away the agency they have when they vote for AfD, because there are lots of reasons for people to vote for AfD. And I would say 1% of it is that they read something interesting or that they shared a meme, a right-troll meme about something that the Democratic Party has done. So we should not fall into the trap of believing that people are so gullible to vote for a party just because they saw something online. And as you mentioned before, you said that many people have fun spreading disinformation or funny memes, which they know are absurd in a way, but they still do it because it gives them likes or followers or something like this. So as you said, we need regulation, and we need to bring it into schools, how to deal with digital instruments and how to deal with that. But looking at schools, take a look at how long it takes before something comes into the classroom, how long it takes before teachers study this in universities for, 5 years and then practice this in school. So this takes time. And the problem right now is that we have to find a way to, bridge the gap before it is in schools and before we can deal with AI in a constructive way in schools. So on the one hand side, try to be optimistic. Don't think that everybody believes in what any, on X or wherever troll is showing you. And on the other hand, we have to invest more. And this is maybe the critical point in civic education and European civic education.
Thank you so much. I think Ms. Salecl wants to follow up on that, and then...
Yeah, I think you should look also at the positive use of the social media by Zoran Mandani, the candidate for the mayor of New York, who actually came from nowhere. He had at the start 1% support and then won the Democratic primary. And it was a simple message addressing, the poverty, addressing the rising prices, the lack of housing, and very, very skillful use of the social media, and also not backing down on very important issues. For example, discussing genocide in Gaza openly, although he's of Muslim background, and I embracing, I would say, all kinds of democratic struggles openly. So I think that things are not totally lost. I completely agree with you that this polarization and manipulation is dangerous and will increase. With the AI, definitely we will have more of very skilled manipulation. And of course, we are living in time where we are losing belief in science, identification with experts, which is very much kind of bringing power to the populists, to the authoritarian leaders who actually do not want people to think too deeply or, sort of kind of analyze more complex things, but rely on their emotional, affective responses.
Thank you. Ms. Pisarska.
Yes, so very, very, very quickly. I think what was said before is important. Today, perceptions matter more than reality. Yes, very often, and there's a great study in the last year's Journal of Democracy by Thomas Karatan, a great expert on democracy altogether, where he analyzed 12 countries around the world, from Brazil to Poland, from Turkey to Bangladesh, where populism or democratic backsliding was happening for one reason or the other. And he discovered that, what we assume why backsliding happens, so inequality, poverty, negative growth, usually wasn't the main reason for democratic backsliding. Actually, of the countries he looked at that were backsliding, the majority had positive economic growth for years, not all, but the majority of them. Most of them actually rose from poverty very quickly in the last decade or so. And even if the inequality rate was increasing, apart from the United States, the majority have not seen this big of a change in equality if you would look in the history of these countries when there were times of much bigger inequality. But still people they just feel things are going south. Yes, if I were to ask you, how many of you think that the world is going to be a better place in 10 years? Raise your hands, who believes? Oh, we do, you see. Will be a better place in 10 years. Oh, okay, so you see, but it is the minority, yeah? If I would ask you, how many of you think that you will be better in 10 years? More people, but generally, people feel that they're okay, they're doing better, many people, and the studies show that they personally cannot complain. And this is the case of Poland very much. People actually got richer over the last 10 years. They feel that their personal perspective is much better, but the world is going south. And this perception is fueled by social media, big time. People are just all the time afraid that what they have, they're going to lose in the future. And that's one of the reasons, if you ask me what to do with social media, I have been myself a victim of really, really vicious trolling, hatred, and women, unfortunately, especially in politics and any activists are really targeted very viciously. And I know this is not a silver bullet, but I'm one of the largest proponents of actually internet IDs. You can read whatever you want. You can get on any website you want. But if you want to comment, I want to know who you are. I have enough of your anonymity. If you're able to say this, without saying who you are, then you don't have the right to say it. Yeah? Just like on the street, if somebody would come and harass you face to face, well, I know who's doing this. But if you're in a mask, that's a crime. Yeah? That is a crime. So I would start there, and if we could move this, I know all the counter arguments and so on, but I think we're in such a toxic, environment when it comes to multimedia and all our platforms that you need something drastical to happen to stop the trolling, stop the boots, stop foreign interference. We need to know who's saying what on these platforms.
Thank you so much, Albie.
I speak for a big number of people who are a little bit overwhelmed by anything technical. So I was going to zip up completely. But maybe I can use my ignorance as representative in a democratic way of a large number of people. Technology, certainly in Africa when it came to elections, was hugely pro-democratic. The cell phones, the Arab Spring, in Kenya afterwards, in Mozambique afterwards. So technology per se, it's not positive, it's not negative. It's not like a gun that can only destroy and kill. It's available, and it can be massively helpful and massively pro-vulnerable groups, groups excluded from power, groups giving a voice in a way that didn't happen before, and we saw in New York how important it's been. And it fits in with the distinction our court had to make in one case between representative democracy and participatory democracy. And it's participatory democracy that gives real strength to representative democracy. It's not just quantitative. Then certain groups can get a majority, they're in power, they're structurally strong, the big parties represent them, they have lobby groups, but people on the ground feel excluded, feel marginalized. And we actually struck down a law that had passed all the processes, been signed into law, but Parliament, a section of Parliament had promised public hearings and reneged on that, and we said participatory democracy requires that goes back to Parliament and you have that participation. What is a matter of deep concern to me, and similar to what you're saying, it's stronger than simply ID, because some people are proud of their racism, they're proud of their sexism, they love being bullies, they love hurting, and they love people to know that they're the ones causing the hurt. And that whole theme of shifting the focus from freedom to say what you like, wherever you like, to whoever you like, as the absolute, and human dignity, and our history in South Africa of apartheid, of exclusionism, of racism, of racial supremacy, of denial of humanity of human beings has made us very, very strongly in favor of human dignity. We don't allow people to say black people are monkeys and go to jail for saying that, because it touches on a deep nerve of great historical exclusion, and it's not only in our country as well. So I support the idea of regulation. Regulation, not only that you own up to what you're saying, but there's certain things that should not be allowed. And that power to wound, the power to disgrace, the power to oppress, to continue, that you can't do publicly through the law, through demarcation, which race can sit where, that power also has to be excluded. So as somebody who is almost illiterate technically, I say bring it on. It's going to happen. Bring it on, but in ways where we understand what's being brought on. And we have a regulation, a matrix of profoundly dignified values and usages that we should focus on very, very intently and try and make them as universal as possible.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted to add, oh, sorry, Matjaž. I just wanted to add one thing, because we have to remember that in the next few years, what we're going to have on our social media platforms is actually not people speaking to people. We're going to have bots speaking to bots. And why is that going to happen? Because the majority of the effort right now comes from external efforts, with external companies, states, and so on, fueling these trolls, fueling these bots, in order to suppress often debate. Because if you go into a post that you strongly support, like women's rights, whatever, whatever is your big advocacy thing, and then you see like thousands of posts. Oh, we don't need this. Oh, this is stupid. Women should not get a vote. Whatever. Yes. At some point, and I had the same thing, multiple times on other issues. I feel okay. Maybe I'm not going to click. I like this post that promotes human rights or women's rights, because there's so much hatred under it. It means I'm in the minority probably, and they're in the majority. So there is a fight of perceptions, and it's not done by human beings. What you see in the comments are not human beings, and somebody with an agenda to shift a debate, to suppress your willingness to support a given cause. And this no longer makes sense. Either people will simply drop out of social media altogether, and the reasonable people have already done this. Many people have already done this. And what you get then is a radicalized space for radicals that then try to push the agenda because they're convinced they're right, because all the boots are telling them that women shouldn't vote, for example. So this is why regulations are key, or a complete revolution really in the way we work in social media.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Gruden.
Yeah, no, this is also very fascinating discussion. But I'd like to go back to what Katarzyna said before about the relationship between social and economic status people and democratic backsliding, because I think it's very important. And when we're talking about the future democracy, or is it that? So I think it's one of the key questions. I don't completely agree with the fact that just because people are living better, there's been improvement in their living standard, that necessarily mean that they're satisfied with it. I think it was a Polish, no, because it's not a paradox that, they live better than they were, they lived in the central poverty, and they still don't like democracy. I think it was a Polish sociologist that coined that phrase of syndrome of relative deprivation, where people live better, and in most countries where we come from, Central Eastern Europe, clearly, materially, the life has improved for a great majority of people. But relative deprivation is that it did not improve as much as they expected and wanted. And secondly, they feel that it has improved far more for many other people who don't deserve it. And that is very powerful negative sentiment that can be exploited for democratic backsliding. Also, you have, last night was Ivan Krastev, somebody who know, a brilliant mind who actually once explained the attitudes on Eastern Europeans on democracy through Nutella. I don't have time to go into it, but look it up, it's fantastic. What I want to say is, what is key really is how people perceive their future. That's, I think, one of the most important, and we have lost that confidence in the future, and that was replaced by fear, and that is what is most corrosive, most destructive. A democracy, a liberal democracy, cannot function in a situation where a growing number of people are fearful of their future. Whether that fear is justified fully, whether it's been magnified, stimulated, manipulated, is another matter, but it is there, and it's extremely, extremely detrimental to democracy. So one thing, if we want to restore confidence in democracy, which is necessary for democracy to function, we have to look for the reasons why people have lost confidence in democracy. We'll come to the reason why they have lost confidence in the future, what makes them fearful, and then deal with that.
Thank you so much. We had a question from over there, and then the lady over there.
Thanks a lot. I'm from China, and one of the speakers just said democracy is an open subject, right? So I believe that democracy has only one model. The key to judge the democracy lies in whether it promotes the well-being of China. China has lifted 100 million people out of poverty. If you really want to judge whether this country is democratic or not, please go to this country and see our People's Congress system and to see our political consultation system and local mass governance, because action speaks louder than words. And you will have an objective view about China. And just as our speaker said, human dignity is most important. The basic well-being of Chinese people are really well guaranteed. So I can see that the majority of Chinese people is confident about their future, and we have we are capable of to make our own foreign policy, of security. That's the meaning of democracy, the result of democracy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for your comments. She did not ask a question, but if anybody wants to respond to that, please go ahead. 1, 2,
Sorry,
and then we're going to take the question.
I think that, on one hand, we have been, since the end of the Second World War and established United Nations, having sort of legal commitment to that model as human rights as a universal value. Problem was that it wasn't always universally applied by those who had their mouth full of those values. So I can understand that there are suspicion, negative perceptions about that model in many countries. Secondly, we've also been trying to, I think, too aggressively impose our own ideas, approaches to some others. I don't think that ever works. So I wouldn't be really commenting or interfering how China does things, but I would, nevertheless, I think, claim that for much of the world, including and especially Europe, based on Europe's history, we haven't invented that model of democracy out of the blue because we're sitting around and didn't know what better thing to do. It is a model of democracy to the very last element of protection of human rights and political freedoms that is a direct response, not to the Second World War, but to the period before the Second World War. It's a reverse engineering of every step of decline into inhumanity that Europe has seen during the 1930s that has determined the mechanism to prevent this from ever happening. So while I will not abstain from commenting how China and the Chinese people are deciding and organizing their life, I will absolutely, definitely defend the model of democracy in my country and in this continent.
Thank you. Albie.
I think China is a very, very great country with an amazing history. And for quite a number of years in my life, I was very inspired by the Chinese historical experience. I even learned the anthem, "Arise, you refuse to be bond slaves. Let's stand up and fight for liberty and true democracy." I followed the journey. Mao Zedong seemed to be doing amazing things, and then discovered amazing things, but millions of people died and huge problems and different changes. My admiration for China continues, and I think there's not much understanding of China. It's oversimplified, comparing democracy, freedoms in the West, China, autocratic. There's much richer dialogue is required because millions of people have seen their lives get better, millions of people are supporting. But speaking as somebody who was very pro-Chinese for a number of years, passionate years of my life, I would like to see more rule of law, less dependent on simply party decisions, and some kind of independent institutions where there is legality for ordinary people. It's happening in international relationships. China today has become one of the great stabilizers of international law in terms of many international institutions. And I'd like to see what used to be called "let many 100 flowers blossom" and different schools of thought contend, a phrase that was used at one stage in China, more opening up, more diversity, more debate, to simply say, we are great, they are bad, I don't think is useful in understanding China and even in understanding what we call our greatness. So it's saying, you've spoken from your experience, you're relating to something that's been a miracle in the world with hundreds of millions of people coming out of poverty, moving around, making choices, 500,000 going to the United States to study, things of that kind. That's very, very, very positive. At the same time, for many of us, there isn't the freedom of speech, the openness, the contestation that could make China even greater than it is today.
Thank you for that. We only have 5 minutes. If you could talk up to 1 minute, then we have one last question. Unfortunately, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, well, I can only join my respect for China. We are organizing the German-Chinese Dialogue Forum, and what we see is that Chinese have a far richer and more deeper understanding of how politics in Germany, especially Germany and in Europe, work. But at the same time, when you posed the first question, we gathered what is important from our perspective for democracy. And we came up with peaceful change of government. And as long as one of these most important pillars is not there, we don't see democracy. And this is just one of the points I would like to add to the things that you said, that from our perspective, this is not the democracy as we understand it. And as you pointed out, was created out of the rubbles of World War II. So just to give you our perspective to better understand what lacks, I think, today in China.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've been to China twice. I think you've done incredible. I think there's a lot that we could be, and we are inspired of in terms of taking so many people out of poverty, the level of technology, the level of very often, especially in cities, quality of life. But I, as a civic activist, I have only one. And it's a very selfish, really, it's a very selfish, how do you say it, worry that I always have. I always ask myself, if I were alone against a government, so the government comes to my house, takes away my property, or says, you no longer can go to this school, or you no longer can vote, or you no longer can do this. Does the country have the tools for me to defend myself from the government? That is, for me, always the ultimate test of whether this is democracy I want to live in. Do I stand, as a single person, a chance to fight against a powerful government, whether it be the United States government, my Polish government, your Slovenian government, or the Chinese government. And this brings, the fundaments of democracy. And the fundaments of democracy is that everybody is equal, and everybody is equal in the light of law, and everybody has a chance to go to court. And even if it is the government itself who's harassing you, you have, if you're right, a chance to stand against it. And I think, where you see democratic backsliding, that's where the problem always starts. That the individuals who oppose the government start to suffer, they're jailed, everything is taken away from them, and that begins a huge process that not ends with this individual, it ends with much more people who have decided to stand up and say they don't like something that the government says.
Thank you so much. Would that be okay if you could ask your questions after the session? I'm so sorry, but we have 3 minutes, and I want to do a wrap-up round. Oh, that I never want to. Please go. You look so disappointed.
Okay, thank you. Question to Renata Salecl. People don't only vote far-right and anti-democratic parties because out of frustration or because they're manipulated. They are also very much seduced by them and their messages. What do these parties have that we don't have, and what does it tell about human nature?
As long as that question.
Yes, I think that they really very effectively use emotions. And, emotions are the most important part of politics. Anger can fuel change, positive change. We need to be angry to make kind of a change. But as Hannah Arendt, for example, said, it's important that anger is linked to some ideals, let's say, of equality, justice, human rights, or whatever. If not, it becomes kind of dispersed. And, that kind of a dispersed anger is very easily fueled towards others, migrants, LGBT, or whatever. And I think the feeling that someone is stealing from you an enjoyment with his or her life, we often say with migrants they are lazy and they are stealing our jobs, at the same time. And that kind of idea that if we will get rid of the other, I will get the enjoyment is essentially wrong, because we are always losing something. That's kind of what drives us, a desire for something else, for change. And I think here, democratic politics will need to use emotions, these emotions in a kind of a positive way, which I think is already happening, like with Mamdani and similar young politicians in the United States and elsewhere. Okay,
I'm told I don't have any much more time, but I want to give the last word to a representative of Young BSF. I talk so quick.
Sorry.
You have 30 seconds.
Well, I was asked to give comments that was maybe a little more than 30 seconds. I'll talk and you can leave if you want to. So I'm part of the Young Bled Security Forum Fellows, or Strategic Forum. So we were here for 3 days already having conversations about democracy and values. And honestly, it absolutely terrified me. And I think 3 arguments emerged out of it, which are also representative of the discussion we've had today, which I think we need to win, and we're not winning. So the first one is this idea of relativism, that the universalist hold has weakened, that we even heard from a representative of a Stiftung regional office who said some people just aren't suited to democracy, which I find a very distasteful argument. They have different priorities. Why would you say that your voice is more important than your well-being? We need to win that argument. We've heard it here as well. The second one, that democracy is less effective. Does authoritarianism actually deliver? Okay, China. I think this ignores a lot of stuff about how we have authoritarian regimes where half the population is starving, and we have African countries who've absolutely flourished through democracy, including Botswana or Mauritius. And the problem is that we're now doing this kind of politics of things where we have to deliver. I agree, we have to deliver and deliver. But the problem is that this exhausts voters who feel they're constantly being asked about issues and not attitudes. It means that they are sometimes diagnosing incorrectly. They say we want less migration. What they mean is we want better social services. I don't think that works. I think that we do need this emotional case, which we've heard about. That's why the populists are winning, because we have no emotional centre.
30 more seconds, please. We have to end the session. She's approaching me.
And I think that vision is needed to combat this perception that democracy isn't working when it so clearly is. Because I accept the idea about building a paradise, that's great. But as Milan Kundera said, if you build a paradise, you have to build a gulag next to it. And the point of liberal democracy is that, no, you can never win everything, but you can also never lose everything. And that's an incredibly powerful thing to hold on to. I think that we need to get better at winning these arguments: relativism, efficacy, and a moral case for the center. And I'm not hearing enough, so I would ask you all, come and find me if you have a good argument.
Interesting ending to a great session. Thank you so much. Give another big round of applause to our speakers. Thank you so much for your remarks and the participation of this panel. Thank you so much.